The battlefield echoes with cries and sounds of combat. Tsukasa Misaki reports that there are only 2,000 opponents, and it seems that his kingdom is greatly underestimated. He asks the soldiers, is he speaking correctly? Tsukasa says they'll find out today. The guy says, gentlemen, let's show them. Tsukasa Misaki stands with his team ready for battle. Tactics Chronicle. The man reports that the 4th-generation virtual reality game is an RPG with elements of kingdom management, SLRPG. The game became rapidly popular because it stood out from other similar games, and it also captured the fantasy world setting very well. The guy explains that when he first logged into the game, he saw a vast steppe before his eyes. Then he felt a gentle breeze and the scent of grass, clenched his fist, and beamed with anticipation. He explains that this is where our adventure begins and invites us to create our own kingdom. The ruler stands on the castle balcony, looking down at his warriors lined up in the square. Dragons appear behind him. The ruler notices them. The knight orders to line up, announces the 1st and 2nd detachments. The knights shout hooray and say long live the king. The ruler of the kingdom of Archimera says this is truly impressive. He explains that after so many hardships, Archimera has become the strongest kingdom in the world and announces that it is time to celebrate the 150th anniversary of the kingdom's founding. Tsukasa Misaki says Tactics Chronicle truly has all the monsters, and the results of his efforts are noticeable. He calls it amazing. He explains that the ogre was only available during the national holiday, so he thought it would be strong enough and put it at the head of the party. However, the ogre died, leaving Tsukasa disappointed. The ruler says that someone should come soon and starts counting down from 5. As soon as he says the number 1, he immediately looks at the door and says to come in. The woman reports to Mr. Helian that preparations for the celebration of the founding of the kingdom are complete and asks to go on stage. Mr. Helian says that he is ready to go on stage and praises the girl for her good performance. Works at. The guy calls them to follow and explains that keywords are a system that allows players to interact and communicate with NPCs in Tactics Chronicle. The girl with the ears says, yes, sir. The guy thanks the girl, whose name is Riv. Riv sits with a bored look. The guy explains that Riv is one of 3 monsters he got from Gacha when he first started playing Tactics Chronicle. The first one was a small beast man from a rare wolf race. He explains that the second monster he got was a low-ranking demon cat, and the third was a white fairy. The man informs her that they are now the commanders of the kingdom's 2nd and 3rd corps. He explains that thanks to them and the other monsters he summoned, his kingdom has become the strongest, the 8 great army corps of the Archimera kingdom. The man explains that he patiently cared for her for several years, and she has grown into a first-class monster. And in the game, it's already the 150th anniversary of the kingdom's founding. Tsukasa calls himself sentimental. The man says that no matter what he says this year, the game effect will not change and no one is forcing him to roleplay. The image shows an arched ceiling with a massive chandelier. Tsukasa Misaki remains silent. The ceiling collapses. The boy screams, expressing shock and confusion. A girl with ears and a tail suddenly moves forward. A knight in armor salutes, then a view of the city from above is shown, where the main building is collapsing. The guy asks what it was and if it looks like a natural disaster event, and also wonders if it's a bug. Reeve asks Mr. Helian if he's hurt, to which he replies that he's fine and there's no need to worry. The man explains that nothing is loading at all and wonders why this is happening now. He explains that the NPC reacted immediately, so it's definitely not a bug. Perhaps it was an earthquake. The man reports that depending on the epicenter, the destruction could be enormous, recovery would take a long time, and the happiness of citizens would drop. He calls it a disgusting event. The guy is silent, then says with horror that he doesn't understand what's happening. The guy asks what happened and whether the terrain around the capital has changed. He reports that it was all steppe. He explains that the city seems intact and doesn't see any craters. The image shows a dense forest outside the castle walls. The young man explains that since the terrain has changed, it's possible it was a mass spell, and that the 3rd and 4th Corps are currently in the capital. He reports the need to contact the nearest commander. The man orders Reeve to return to headquarters for him. Reeve confirms the order. The guy says there is no access and asks to open a map of the area. The guy reports that the entire territory, except for the capital, is covered in the fog of war, and asks how this is possible. The guy reports that the kingdom was forcibly moved and ended up in undeveloped lands. He explains that a forced move is a rare and unfortunate event, but this is the first time he's heard of an entire capital being moved and doubts it's even possible. He says it's nonsense and that only the administration could do something like that. The guy says that this is an unfair act and the developers have a pretty bad reputation, so he cannot say with certainty that they are not capable of this. The girl mumbles something to Mr. Helian. He asks if she is under the effect of fear or not and says that Riv has a passive ability called courage, and that it seems the event will not be easy. The boy tells Riv that the capital of their kingdom was forcibly moved, and the girl says that first of all it is necessary to understand the current state of the kingdom. The young man announces that he will relay basic instructions to all corps and orders them to contact the commander of each corps to gather information to understand the current situation. The young woman replies that she will obey. Then the young woman opens the door and exits. The man reports Shanshetu open the tactical overview and display the command screen. The man announces that instructions must now be given to each corps and orders the leaders of the 8 corps to listen to his order, to suspend the celebrations in honor of the 150th anniversary of the founding of the kingdom due to the emergency situation and to follow his instructions. He announces that the 1st corps, as usual, will be his assistant. The man continues that the 2nd corps will be responsible for maintaining the population's safety, while the 3rd corps will provide aid to the wounded and check the barrier along the outer wall. The 4th corps will use reconnaissance magic to survey the area around the city. The 5th corps will provide all possible support to the 2nd corps and provide aid to damaged buildings. The 6th corps collects information inside and outside the walls in cooperation with the 4th corps, and the 7th corps carries out repair work on damaged objects. The man reports that the 8th corps is in charge of monitoring and protecting the capital, but none of the corps should engage in combat with other kingdoms, and first of all, they need to find out what is happening in their kingdom and assemble their own corps. The ruler says he's done everything he can and will now wait for the report to come in. No one could have imagined such a thing could happen on the day of the kingdom's founding celebration. The young man says he'll file a complaint against them for such a terrible event. The guy says that in games there are always people who are unhappy with the new update, and then suggests getting to know the neighbors, since the holiday is already ruined anyway. The guy says that all the players except him are offline and asks what that means. He expresses confusion. Hearing a knock on the door, the man allows entry. The woman enters and informs Mr. Helian that she has come to report her findings. The man asks if there are any problems. The woman explains that they have never encountered anything like this before, so they are a little confused, and says she will proceed directly to the report. She says that, firstly, the capital is surrounded by dense forest. According to the 6th Corps' intelligence, the forest has a magical property and prevents further magical reconnaissance directly from the capital. The young man explains that this means the 4th Corps must be sent on reconnaissance. The young woman says it appears the 4th Corps' commander has already departed without authorization. The ruler is perplexed. The guy says that given the forest around, they need to organize a reconnaissance group of elves. The girl replies that's fine. The guy asks if this is enough. The girl says that she will pass on the instructions to the commander of the 4th Corps. The girl explains that the 8th Corps was reconnoitered from the air, and according to the reconnaissance results only the end of the forest is visible in the northeast. They say that since the reconnaissance was carried out within the capital's borders, it was not possible to confirm this. The guy is excited. Riva continues, the dragons were asking to be allowed to rise higher, or to fly beyond the capital's borders, but she put the dragon in its place with a solid punch. She explained to the dragon that the king's orders were not to provoke or engage in combat with other kingdoms, and asked what was so unclear. She continued that while they were managing to keep the population calm, the recently joined ogres, the ruler didn't let Riva finish and interrupted her. Helian he asks if he used keywords, and the girl explains that she doesn't understand what keywords are. The guy says he was talking to himself and asks if the girl reacted to his words. The girl replies that it wasn't an order. The guy asks her to wait and says that's wrong. It's impossible for an NPC to react to phrases without keywords. Reeve confirms. The girl asks if he's still just thinking and apologizes for interrupting his thoughts. The guy says no and asks her to wait. Helian, he says he'll contact GMOM. Then he says he can't get in touch and no matter where I click, there's no response. Helian says to himself, calm down and pull yourself together. Reeve asks him if he's sick, as he's suddenly turned pale. She asks if he's okay. The guy apologizes and leans his face towards her. Face is surprisingly close to Reeve's. Helian touched her with his hand. Reeve says, huh? What? Helian says that's definitely impossible. The boy explains that the all-sensory projection system is capable of transmitting all 5 senses, such as the sensation of touch, but it's still artificial. But why can he feel her breath? Why does her skin blush so naturally and exude a pleasant scent? She's confused. Helian says he can only think of 3 explanations for what's happening. The guy says the most logical thing is a new major update for Tactics Chronicle. This update has boosted artificial intelligence, and all 5 senses are sensed in a way that's indistinguishable from reality. Reeve asks the man if he's okay. The man says the second option is a high-quality prank. He explains that he's looking at a very high-quality Riva cosplay, in other words, a massive prank from the administration. The third option is that the main character finds himself in the world of a manga or game, a theme that was very popular in novels about 50 years ago. On the shelf there are books with titles related to getting into another world. Peace. Tsukasa expresses surprise. Meanwhile, Reeve asks him to sit down, explaining that he will now call the commander of the Third Corps. Helian, he says it's not worth it, that he's fine, and asks to continue gathering information. He sighs and says they need to try to get out, calling it an emergency exit. Access denied. Helian says he's not coming out and remains silent, then looks away. The man says he still remembers the excitement he felt when he first entered the game. The guy reports that the words "Here our adventure begins" that he shouted back then now have a new meaning. He reveals that his name is Tsukasa Misaki, the ruler of the Archimere Kingdom, Helian, and that in this new world he will gather an invincible army. As a human, he became the weakest king. Tactics Chronicle is described as a next-generation SLRPG set in a fantasy world, with many features that set it apart from other games. In this game, the king himself is incapable of fighting. The player's physical abilities are the same as those of the average person in the real world, and it's impossible to become stronger. In short, in this game, only your subordinates are powerful. The ruler himself is the weakest being in the world. A man with a cloak stands before the throne, and 4 figures kneel. The woman reports that the commanders of the main corps have arrived by order of the king. The man thanks her for coming and asks her to raise her head. Helian reports that he hasn't seen some of those present for a long time and says that they won't waste time, but will get straight to the point. The guy asks if it would be okay if he spoke to them in a commanding tone and explains that he must appear to be a worthy king. A man with a lion's head holds a sword. Helian tells Baron to report on the current situation in the country after the incident, to which Baron agrees. Baron reports that there are no security problems inside the kingdom. Only a few people were injured in the incident, and citizens are gradually calming down. Baron is reportedly the commander of the Beast Knights. He possesses the unique skill Knightly Spirit. He also has the skill Discipline. If anyone can be trusted to maintain internal security, it's him. The boy says the BA's work was good and announces that it's Eltana's turn now. She explains that she'll start from the beginning as ordered. Eltana explains that the Third Corps treated all the wounded, and that while inspecting the outer barrier, they noticed something. The road leading from the main gate has disappeared, and everything beyond the wall is covered in dense forest. The guy says that not only Riva but also other NPCs have gained consciousness. Eltana is the leader of the Holy Spirit Order, which specializes in healing and support. Her unique skills are mercy and teamwork, while her elegance skill highlights her character and beauty. She also adds that the forest is magical, preventing her from conducting reconnaissance using magic. The guy says, let's assume that no one knows that their country is here, and confirms this with the word aha. He continues that then the main objective is to explore the surrounding world as quickly as possible without revealing the existence of their kingdom, and orders continued exploration, trying not to reveal themselves. The commanders are responsible for. The boy reports that he ordered them to proceed with caution, and fortunately, none of them objected. He also says that they don't seem to think it's a cowardly move. He asks Riva if it's true that even the most powerful mages can't handle the forest. She confirms. Riva explains that the 4th Corps commander's report states that it's some previously unknown form of magic, so it will take time. Riva is the commander of the guard. Her job is to assist the king. Her skill is bravery. Furthermore, she is in charge of all 8 corps. The boy forbids the use of brute force, explaining that it could disturb forces unknown to them. The boy adds that, of course, their existence may already be known, but they have no room for error. Reeve says she knew he would say that, so she told him to know her place, as Master Helian banned brute force. Helian says it's excellent. He says that as always she holds herself with dignity, but her tale gives her away, and that you can immediately understand her thoughts from it. Helian he reports that Riva did a good job, and both Riva and the girl thank him and confirm it. The man explains that he doesn't just talk to his subordinates like that. The guy reports that there was one more thing in this game, a rebellion system. After this incident, happiness levels remain low, which will lead to a drop in loyalty, and if that happens, a rebellion may break out. Helian he says he's surrounded by powerful monsters, and he's such a fragile, weak man. Helian says that if they want to conduct reconnaissance without risking provoking other countries, they'll have to do it without magic. He says the 6th Corps should handle the reconnaissance then. Camilla says that if that's what they're ordered to do, she and her corps will do everything in their power. Camilla reports that they're having a slight problem exploring the forest. The boy asks what the problem is. Camilla explains that the 6th Corps, which she commands, was created during the Cold War with other kingdoms and is unrivaled in the field of intelligence gathering. She explains that everyone in her team, including herself, has never worked in previously unexplored territory, so she's afraid they might not cope, and she's afraid she might not cope herself. She also says she's sorry. The guy says he's mistaken. Then he makes a sound of surprise. The girl explains that they are specialists in collecting information for information warfare, but land reconnaissance is a completely different matter. They specialize in gathering information about the enemy's condition, and reconnaissance of unexplored territories is not part of their specialty. The girl says there are no more suitable people, and if they can't find them, then the 6th building will take over. The man explains that he understands her concerns. Helian says he doesn't mind the comments and thanks Camilla for what she said. Camilla says yes and thanks him. Helian tells himself to keep his cool and act like a king. The ruler says that they will do it differently then, and turns to the commanders of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd with the question whether they remember how to conduct reconnaissance of new territory. The commanders say yes, they remember. Helian announces that he is sending a small group of elite soldiers to ensure their survival in the unknown lands. Depending on the results, they will decide what to do next. The boy leaves internal security to Baron and informs him that Riv and Eltona will handle reconnaissance. Riv and Eltona reply that they understand. The boy explains that much time has passed and they have grown stronger, raising their morale before the important mission. He has no doubt they can handle it, and believes that this is one of the king's most important duties. The boy says they have nothing to worry about. The only difference from their first reconnaissance mission is that Aaron won't be with them. Reeve and Camilla listen. The girls with ears and tails are surprised, looking at Helian sitting on the throne. The man reports that the 6th Corps continues to gather information within the capital and will depart from the northern gate in 10 minutes, ordering Reeve and Eltona to prepare. Reeve complies. The man asks if he imagined it, or if they just tensed up more. And if he said something wrong? The king announces that this is the end of the audience and orders the remaining commanders to continue their duties, to which the commanders respond. Yes. Helian he thinks that nothing can be done and what was said cannot be taken back, so he has no choice but to accept it for now. The commanders kneel before the ruler. Camilla breathes a sigh of relief. She says she's still unsatisfied and would like to speak with him under different circumstances, explaining that she hasn't had an audience with him in 3 years. despite the obvious advantage of being his interlocutor. The man says she's behaving inappropriately and that her habits won't give her a chance. The man explains that not everyone is worthy of being the king's confidants in the capital, but the three of them, who have been with him since the very beginning, are more deserving than anyone else. He says that the king is a man, so perhaps he doesn't notice that Reeve's hobby is something he can't call worthy. Camilla says Eltona too seems somehow suspicious. Eltona says wow, and asks what the girl means by that. The guy asks Eltona whether she will explain or not. Eltona is silent and asks to sit down. She tells Camilla to sit down and calls her by name. Camilla is surprised. The woman says that they will now talk and asks Camilla why she called her suspicious. The girl says she just wanted to say that the king likes girls, after which Eltona points out that that is a strange way of saying it. He says Camilla was probably hinting that she likes their master, but in reality, she likes nice girls. The girl says that's what she calls abnormal. The woman explains that she saw His Majesty muttering this under his breath too, and says that there's nothing strange or suspicious about this. The girl is surprised and asks if it's the Lord. The man says that if Helian were here, he would probably try to avoid the topic and suggests a better. Tsukasa Misaki says that Camilla also explains that there is something valuable in a girl's face when she pays, because in this world, a woman says there's nothing sweeter than a girl who's about to burst into tears, and then adds, nothing. The girl first says BA, then repeats the ram with a question, and then remains silent. Reeve says she's been quiet today and asks if anything's bothering her, and Tsukasa Misaki simply replies. The man yells at Reeve not to turn away or ignore what's happening, and Reeve calls him a jerk. The woman says this whole story haunts her. The woman says that, as he says, our master, the man with the lion's head, is silent. The woman says that since she wasn't the only one who noticed it, she definitely wasn't imagining it. Tsukasa Misaki explains that this is true and asks if that means the woman noticed it too. The woman says that she will keep an eye on the situation in the capital and asks Reeve if he doesn't mind. Eltona asks Reeve if he's listening to her, and Reeve allows it. Eltona explains that the whole situation with the forced relocation of the capital has left her confused. She was so worried about Master Helian's safety that she pestered him unnecessarily, and she feels like she ended up scaring him. Helian says he wouldn't have faced any of these hardships if he weren't the ruler of Archimere's most powerful kingdom, and that they will be his pawns, as always. He explains that they must work together to pave the way for their kingdom and king. The woman says she doesn't think it's wrong to worry about His Majesty, but remains silent. Tsukasa Misaki says that she shouldn't take it personally. It's also part of her job, and also says that she had no one else to share it with and asks for forgiveness. The boy says he intended to act like a worthy king, but he's already managed to make a mistake and has the impression it's only going to get worse. He explains that he wanted to appear confident so others wouldn't think he was nervous, and asks what he said wrong. The man says that nothing can be done and explains that the most important thing now is to see Riv and Eltona off, come what may. The guy says he's done sitting around and suggests going there, observing everything with his own eyes and hearing everything with his own ears. He explains that his teacher taught him this. The guy says he thinks it's necessary if you're responsible for others, and the girl says she didn't expect to become such a big shot at 20. The guy says he hears a sound. The man says this place is the royal palace and explains that all the knights of the kingdom gather here. The man explains that the knights swear to protect the king and the country at any cost. The guy asks what this is and says that no matter how many commanders are sent on a mission, in his opinion, it's too much. The woman with ears explains it. The girl with flowers in her hair listens. The woman says that the servants will take care of the cloak, and the guy says that they are ready. A girl in a bunny costume and a girl in a maid costume lift a cloth revealing a guy. The guy says he doesn't understand what's going on. The woman says she will do everything she can for him and their kingdom. Tsukasa Misaki says she's ready to go and will protect him no matter what lies ahead. The guy asks to wait and what's going on. The woman explains why they're dressing the guy in armor for the expedition. The guy says it's as if he himself is going on a mission. The guy says he said back then that the only difference from the first reconnaissance mission was that the ram wouldn't be with them. He explains that he, who conducted the very first reconnaissance mission with them, was also included in the reconnaissance group. The soldiers announce that the king himself will lead a reconnaissance party and order them to raise their swords. One of them greets the king. The guy says he can't believe this is happening. The woman with the ears tells him not to underestimate her. The man says it's been a while since he last went on a reconnaissance mission, so he didn't even think about what he said, and he hates his stupidity and loose tongue. The man orders Riv and Eltona to move out. The woman and the girl respond, yes. The man wonders. The image contains no speech bubbles or text to convey dialogue or narrative. It shows two characters standing back to back against a backdrop of trees. The boy says something's wrong with this forest. They've been walking for an hour, and the surroundings haven't changed. The girl with the ears says so. The man and the elf stand silently nearby. The man says the same trees are all around, and because of the magical effect, they lose their sense of distance. The woman says they lose their sense of distance. The image shows the movement of the wind, which tears leaves from the trees and carries them in different directions. Tsukasa Misaki says it's impossible. A girl and a man with ears stare intently at an explosion in the distance. The man announces that they've finally reached their destination and explains that they need to be careful now, as there may be danger ahead. The girl says she feels excited and ready for the challenges ahead. The second girl says she hopes everything goes smoothly and they can successfully complete their mission. The boy asks if the forest has become normal. The woman reports that the magical effect of the illusion suddenly disappeared. The guy says they might have just gone out of range. He asks if it's a normal forest. The boy informs them that if they continue further, they could run into a trap. Tsukasa Misaki explains that they must be careful and move quietly to avoid attracting enemy attention. The guy notices something approaching and the girl says, "Something's coming, sir." Then the guy reacts to it. The guy reports that the werewolf is over 5 meters tall and is clearly hostile, and says that this is their first contact with the local fauna. The wolf growls and leaps at the man, who retreats. The man looks at the wolf and begins to speak, warning him of the beast's strength. The wolf continues to growl and approach, and the man explains that it is a dangerous creature and needs to be careful. The woman says he seems to have realized he's no match for her, and that a weakling would have died in vain. The man says this is to be expected from a beastman named Riva Moon Wolf. The woman explains that she's not just a direct assistant. Her powers are enough to make him think of her as a weakling, and naturally, she'd be stronger than some rogue werewolf. The man explains that, if you think about it, Reeve's first subordinate. The elf says something is moving northeast and addresses the interlocutor as Your Majesty. The boy reacts with surprise. The guy opens the tactical interface and the map, reports that the information exchange worked, since Elgina warned him, and notes that the color of the dots is white, which means it is unknown whether they are allies or enemies. The guy says there are 2 people there, and it seems like the one behind is chasing the first one. Tsukasa Misaki reports that they are moving together, but not in their direction. The guy hears a faint cry from the person being chased and adds that, besides, the guy says they need to move forward faster. The girl replies that they do, and the other girl agrees. Tsukasa Misaki is breathing heavily and says she's tired. She's running along a forest road, and in the distance, a silhouette of a person is visible. The scene depicts a large dog growling and leaping forward, making loud noises. In the distance, the silhouette of a man is seen jumping back. A boy and a girl see someone ahead, and the boy says he sees them, and the girl asks if it's them. The boy calls out to Elton to stop the demonic beast, and the girl replies that she obeys. Elton casts a spell, summoning a sharp blade and wind. The upper right shows an explosion that throws a figure back. Below, a dog is shown tumbling through the air. Below, a close-up of the dog's eye is depicted, with the inscription on the bandage. Tsukasa Misaki says she cut it. The guy explains that judging by the number of pieces, it was low-level magic, but with a high rate of fire and a slow casting speed. The boy reports that he's motionless and appears to be completely dead. He asks if it was advanced wind magic. The girl explains that it was without a catalyst. The boy says it's good they made it in time and that the girl isn't injured. He wonders if it's the girl. The elf explains that she can't allow herself to die here because she has a duty to her family and people, and she must survive for them. Tsukasa Misaki says he didn't expect to meet an elf in such a state and asks if she really is an elf. The woman is silent, then thanks him for saving her. She puts on her hood. The guy says he's still being cautious. The guy says they accidentally heard a scream as they were passing by and is glad they made it. The girl says there's no need to worry about it. Tsukasa Misaki asks if an elf and a beastman passed by. Beastman Reeve says he's Beastman Reeve, and Elf Eltona says she's Elf Eltona and it's nice to meet you. The man remains silent. The guy says that to be honest, although he is now in the game. The woman reports that her communication skills in the real world were poor, so she felt it was best to leave all communication to Eltona. The woman explains that she is an elf and that elves live very long lives. The elf apologizes and explains that she and Reeve aren't very good at communicating with people. Tsukasa Misaki says he's afraid she's right and says he'll refrain from talking. The guy says he wanted to shift all the responsibility onto Eltona, but for some reason he still feels like he's been stabbed in the back. The man says listen, and the text says that it means you have to come to him. The elf informs him that the two of them are his slaves. The boy and girl listen. The woman says they're just traveling together and that's not their relationship, but the man denies it. The guy asks why they're silent and says he's right. The elf says he doesn't understand why they saved the half-breed. The boy asks if she's half-elf. The girl says that she is a half-elf and asks if the interlocutor now regrets helping her. The guy says no reason. Then the guy explains that he should be sorry because the girl is a half-breed. The girl looks confused and asks what. A woman asks what she doesn't understand. A man explains he wants to know if there's a problem with her being a half-breed. Another man says they helped her because they mistook her for an elf. The woman says he didn't know. The boy and girl react with surprise. The armored man explains that the dog was killed because it was from a corrupted race. The armored elf speaks of unfamiliar faces. The wolf says he can't believe his dog was killed so easily and says they aren't that simple. The guy says hounds, which means she was his, and notes that they're so close to the infinite forest. The man says he didn't expect to see a human here. The man asks if it's a human. Tsukasa Misaki says that something else is more important now, and the man says that it doesn't matter. He says the word spoiled and asks if it's a race. The girl remains silent. The man says, well, and asks if the other really didn't know. He explains that she's a half-breed, not like them, the noble elves beloved by the gods and spirits. The man explains that she is the product of a foul love between an elf and an impure human, who can only reproduce like cockroaches, making her a tainted race. The girl counters that they are not a tainted race and says that's not true. The man yells at her to shut up and warns her that just hearing the other man's voice makes his ears feel like they've been shit in. He forbids her to open his stinking mouth, calling her a filthy half-breed. Tsukasa Misaki and the girl listen silently. The man explains that at first glance it is a beautiful elf, but there is an expression of disgust on his face, and he reports that it is not much different from a human, just as ugly. Tsukasa Misaki says that this is not the time to think about it, but there was not a single unit of the human race in this game. It was exclusively a race of rulers. It is reported that there are many humanoid races such as elves and dwarves, and there were no humans in the game except the player, and his words already go against the setting of the game. The guy says there's no point in thinking about it now and that the main thing is to gather information, and then asks why he was chasing her. The man explains that he just wanted to have some fun. The man reports that there are as many vermin in that city as real rats. He explains that he uses them to train his hounds. The boy says the city is full of half-breeds, and they have the nerve to call this backwater a country. He asks her to imagine they've founded a small town. The man explains that as a pure-blooded elf, he'll make the most of this town and, of course, rid himself of her tainted blood. He talks a lot for someone in the minority and is so confident in his abilities. The guy apologizes for being travelers and explains that he's never been to this part of the country and didn't want to appear ignorant. A man asks a woman if she admits her ignorance, and the woman responds with a question. The character says he thought all monkeys were the same and asks if the other person has an unusual monkey. The man says he's afraid it's too late to ask for forgiveness, but explains that the other man is a monkey who interfered with his hunt and must pay for his sins. The second man reacts with surprise. The woman tells him to stop calling him that, explaining that he's a man, not a monkey. She asks them to leave them alone, saying that they simply live on the edge of the forest and aren't bothering anyone. The man says he's not far from an endless forest and desert. The girl is trying her best to survive, but still asks why people like him. The man yells at the half-breed to shut up and says her voice feels like someone's shitting in his ears. The man announces that he will silence the dog forever and simultaneously activates the storm arrow. A woman asks Tsukasa Misaki what he's doing and whether he's going to die. Tsukasa Misaki notices a strong gust of wind and explains that the roaring sound of the wind is about to burst his eardrums. He then declares that he's finished and wonders why he did it. A sign appears with the name Wind Shield. The man and woman explain that this spell creates a protective barrier that reflects enemy attacks and reduces damage. The elf announces the name of the spell, Entangling Vine. A man and a girl stand behind her. The man says that his faithful hunting hounds must eat them. The man orders them to be eaten. Tsukasa Misaki reports that all this time, Reeve and Eltona understood the importance of first contact. So they had to endure the arrogant elf insulting their master, as gathering information was more important. Eltona hid her dislike and disgust behind a smile, while Reeve. The man says that if he attacked first, then that's a completely different story. The guy shouts stop. The girl strikes a man covered in vines with her hand. The man yells at Reeve and says, stop! The man in the vines is surprised and asks what kind of vine it is and when this happened. The man yells, hey! The woman says they will spare Tsukasa Misaki. The man says there's no need to shed blood. It's just that Tsukasa Misaki forced them, so they had to cool his ardor, and asks if he understands. He says they'll spare him and he'll disappear. The armored man shouts back that he doesn't believe it and is surprised he can say that, adding that some little human dares to open his stinking mouth at him. The man says that he is better than the other and that he is the leader of the noble elves. The guy says he doesn't care who's in front of him and repeats it again. The man demands he get out of his sight or check how serious he is. A guy with a sword fights a creature, a woman and a girl watch the fight. The man is silent, and the woman says that the guy says it was dangerous and they could have killed someone on the other side. The woman explains that you can't start a war without knowing anything about the enemy and confirms that it was indeed dangerous. The guy says, The woman thanks for saving her and expresses her deep gratitude. The guy says he's glad the girl is safe, then reveals that he accidentally revealed to her that he is Reeve and Eltona's boss, and says the word damn while doing so. The man says it ruins his image as a regular traveler. The guy says, yeah. The woman explains that they're actually her faithful companions. The guy says he's just pathetic and unsure of his abilities, so without them he's like a lost child, and laughs. The girl stands silently nearby. The woman laughs, saying aha, and then a ha ha ha, after which she says pf. The woman laughs and says pft. The man with ears and a tail looks confused. The guy with a cloak and armor looks confused. The woman explains that such a powerful elf was simply defeated by a humble man. And it's even funny that she, a half-elf, had problems. The guy says, sorry. The woman apologizes and says that she couldn't control herself, and also asks him not to humiliate himself in front of her. Rafe thanks him for his help, but the man replies that there's nothing to thank him for. The man explains that they were just trying to calm him down and have nothing to thank him for. The woman thanks him for saving her and asks him to accept her gratitude. Then she says she's very sorry, but she can ask him something. The guy asks what's wrong. The elf asks his name. The guy answers. Helian says that's all and introduces himself. Rafa says it's nice to meet you, after which they shake hands. The guy asks what kind of elf it was, and Tsukasa Misaki reports that the city was attacked by elves from Noblewood. The woman explains that the name of their kingdom is Lastwood. Although this is a strong word, it is more like a city-state or even a community, and that 30 years ago Lastwood was founded by an ordinary half-elf. The guy says it's only been about 30 years. The woman says the half-elf race is relatively new. The woman reports that the number of half-elves increased sharply 100 years ago, and before that they could be called a rarity. 100 years ago, the war with humans began. The elves won the first battle thanks to their magical skills, but the humans were far more numerous and overwhelming, so the elves began to suffer defeat after defeat. Humans began to brutally exterminate the elves, and they were forced to retreat to the Great Forest. There, they founded a strong state, and 5 years after the war began, a peace treaty was signed. It is reported that there is one but, and the question is also asked about what happened to the elves who were captured by humans. The woman explains that there's nothing in this world that can't be bought with money, and that even life can be sold. The boy says that's terrible, and the woman explains that in this world, everything is decided by money and power. Tsukasa Misaki explains that if you want to survive, you need to learn to use money and power to your advantage. He explains that after the peace treaty was signed, most of the elves returned to their homeland, but many were already pregnant and eventually gave birth to children conceived by humans. She explains that the elves are very beautiful, so they became human slaves, given to aristocrats, and a woman talks about her ancestors and explains that although she calls them ancestors, she is only from the 4th generation of half-breeds. The guy says he can't afford to relax because the forest is full of dangers. Tsukasa Misaki explains that the elves didn't want to accept half-breeds because they hated humans, and so it's logical. She reports that half-breeds became objects of disgust and bullying. The elf says that now they hate them more than people. The guy asks what people think of them, and the woman explains that they are also disliked but still better than elves. The man says that there is not a single elf who would treat them well, and the girl explains that some people who come to their forest are very friendly to them. The guy says that one even rushed to his aid, and the girl says that the world is not without good people. The guy says there was no such plot in the game. It is reported that the elven race exists, but there was no such war 100 years ago. The boy explains that the elves from Noblewood can't stand the half-elves from Lastwood, and the girl says they just want to live in peace. The man confirms this. The guy explains that their city is very close to human territory, so the elves want to use them as a human shield in case of war with people, but because they were close to the magical forest, no one touched them until now. A woman reports that 3 weeks ago, Noblewood's army suddenly began attacking. The guy asks why they attacked, the man replies that he doesn't know, and the woman says that they claimed that they were of noble blood and came by right to rule the city, but they will never accept it. The guy says they might have wanted to take over these lands to be closer to humans, and then they would have a chance in the war against humans. The girl says it's all too complicated for her. He says that perhaps they want to become a great power again, like 100 years ago, and the man says that they wanted to use the city as a strategic base. The boy says that the fact that they attacked without declaring war raises questions and asks who rules the city. The elf explains that if they simply wanted to occupy the city, they wouldn't have pursued those fleeing. Then the boy expresses doubt. The woman says they have a matriarchal kingdom ruled by a woman, and the man agrees. The woman reveals that the queen of Lastwood and the prince consort have disappeared. The man says that they are not as good at magic and strong as the elves, so he hopes that she is alive, because she was the one who united them and founded the country, and that most likely she was captured by the elves. The woman informs them that powerful monsters inhabit this forest and warns them to be careful. The man explains that they must move quickly and not stop to avoid being ambushed. The woman explains that if anyone lags behind, they risk being eaten. The guy reports that the city has been plundered and the ruler has disappeared, and explains that this is a complete defeat. The guy asks if there's anything he can do in this situation, then explains that the first thing he needs to do is retreat, and then team up with someone and try to fight back together. The man explains that it is not only elves who are discriminated against, but also humans, despite the half-elves. It is explained that they came together to create their own kingdom because they simply had no one else to turn to. The guy asks if he can wait a little. The man replies that of course, no problem. The elf informs them that in another 10 minutes they'll reach the city, explaining that they might be scared when they see them, so she wants to warn them to avoid confusion. The man says that would be a good idea. The elf warns them to be careful just in case because of the magic circle. The guy listens. Tsukasa Misaki explains that it's a summoning magic circle activated by a specific spell and warns that it shouldn't be used without preparation. The The man advises that they must be careful and follow the instructions to avoid danger. The girl explains that she's already learned the necessary steps and is ready to begin. The elf says that he is calling out and asking to be heard, addressing his friend and comrade. The guy says it looks like summoning magic, but he's never heard a spell cast like that before. The woman says she doesn't know how elven magic is used here, and that the more information they gather, the better. The woman asks to accept her as one's own, to hear her ringing voice and to immediately come at the call of an ally. The woman asks if the lady is okay. The boy notices the elves and says that besides the elf, there's also a human and a beast man here, after which Venri orders him to lower his bow immediately. The woman says that these are the travelers who rescued him and demands that they stop. The elf says she summoned older half-breeds, and also, the man addresses her as mistress. The guy asks if he can ask something and wants to know what's going on. The woman explains that they've been on edge lately and asks her to forgive the other girl's behavior. The guy says he understands and asks for her full name. Leifa Rim Lastwood happily announces that her full name is Leifa Rim Lastwood, and that they'll soon reach her kingdom. She also says that she will welcome them there as a member of the royal family. The girl explains that in this forest there is a village inhabited by people who know how to build houses and trees and create bridges between them. She explains that these houses protect them from dangers on the ground and allow them to live in safety. The woman says they'll go a little further and reach a village, and the man replies, "Okay." The man looks at the people standing in the trees. The boy informs them that there are many dangerous creatures in the forest and warns them to be careful. The man explains that they must move together and not lose sight of each other. The man explains that if one falls behind, they could get into trouble. The guy asks if Lady Leaf brought anyone, and the man says that in such a difficult time for them, it's as if there weren't enough elves. The guy says the lady said she was saved, but he doesn't understand anything and still can't imagine what's going on in her head. The girl explains that a man reports to Latest Wood. The boy says these people saved him and asks him to listen. Tsukasa Misaki explains that if they are rude to them, it will be an insult to her as well, and orders him to remember this. The woman asks if these warriors are travelers. The man explains that among them is an elf, as well as a man with black hair and dark eyes, the likes of which he has never seen. The guy is silent. The woman says she feels like an animal in a zoo. Leifa Rym Latestwood is said to be the queen's first daughter, but it is unknown whether the current queen is still alive. Leifa is said to be the first princess and heir to the throne, and it seems she has the potential to unite the people under her rule. The group stands near the tents. The man informs her that she has a younger sister, and also explains that, except for the parents, whose fate is unknown, only the two of them remain from the royal family. The man says she found herself alone in the middle of the forest, being chased, and asks why she's such an important person. The man then explains that it's about rescuing the current queen. The man says that's true. Tsukasa Misaki says she doesn't understand why, but the elves don't kill them, but rather capture them or try to capture them alive. So there's a chance her mother, the current queen, is still alive. Tsukasa Misaki says she tried to get through. The guy is silent. He asks why he is here all alone and where the elite squad is. The woman reports that they were discovered by the enemy before they managed to get over the city wall, and it was not possible to save the others. She barely escaped. The others were caught trying to give her the opportunity to retreat. Tsukasa Misaki reports that it's clear, and the man explains that there might be a guest. The man looks ahead, questioning. The woman says that the guest is asking the lady too many questions and whether it's too rude of him. She also asks if the guest claims to be a traveler, and then why he doesn't understand what's going on in this part of the world. The woman asks the guest if he's really not hiding anything. The guest says that Tsukasa Misaki says that if there are no problems, they can begin. She explains that magic is not allowed in this fight, and if anyone uses it, they will immediately lose. The man says he understands and is ready to fight. The guy says he can't afford to lose, and the girl says he has to be careful. The guy explains that it is clear and he understands Venri's feelings perfectly. The guy asks if they're definitely not working with elves and wants to be sure. The man says he never said that, The guy says that they are not travelers, but at the same time they are not the most ordinary ones. The man asks what you mean. The guy says they came from the forest of the abyss. The woman starts talking. The woman and two men are surprised and ask what's going on, and the man with the cross on his cloak says he doesn't understand. The boy explains that this is the first time he's heard of a demon king in the forest of the abyss. He explains that, based on Leifa's words, the magical forest is called the Forest of the Abyss, and judging by. The man explains that they now understand why he's unfamiliar with this situation. The woman says that 5 days in the forest without supplies and necessary equipment is impossible. The guy tells Riva, and Eltona, the girl with ears, agrees. The woman explains that they found these bags while exploring the ruins. The man says he doesn't fully understand how they work, but these bags allow for the storage of a huge amount of things, despite their small size. The man is surprised and asks what they are and where they got them from. The woman begins to explain what they are. The man explains that this is how they manage to survive. He explains that this bag is called a magic purse. It is reported that the feature allowed one to store a huge number of things inside. In the game it was the most ordinary thing, but due to its feature it was considered more valuable and useful. The guy says that his performance will help avoid further suspicions and tells what plan he came up with. The guy says he knows they don't trust him yet and explains that they are suspicious that he spent so much time in the forest without equipment. So he decided to show the magic pouch to divert all suspicion from himself. The man explains that if you think about it, there are many other factors that could raise suspicions, but they shouldn't pay attention to them because they are too preoccupied with the wallet. The guy reports that everything went smoothly. He managed to distract them and refute the accusations. The boy announces that this is his younger sister, Lilifa. Lilifa says she's coming in. Tsukasa Misaki calls Lilifa little sister. The boy explains to Lilifa that he has an important conversation and asks her to leave them alone. The girl asks her brother to listen to her and asks if he saved her sister from the elves. The boy replies that no, he didn't save her. The boy reports that his comrades, Riv and Eltona, rescued the girl's sister together. The woman says she's weak and therefore unable to fight. The woman says, "Aha." The man apologizes and says he'll have a preventative talk with her later. The man reassures the woman, telling her not to worry, and addresses her as Mrs. Leaf. The girl says she's glad to see the guy and says she's been wanting to meet him for a long time. The guy explains that he's also glad to see her and hopes they can help each other. The guy says and Tsukasa Misaki asks what's wrong. The girl says so. The girl says to Mr. Traveler. A girl asks a man if he likes big breasts. The woman calls out to Lilifa, surprised that she isn't eating, and calls her to come over. The man explains that Mr. Traveler is human. Lilifa says that means he prefers the big ones and asks if that's true. The man asks if hers are really big. Lilifa smiles. The boy says he doesn't really understand it, but he thinks it's appropriate for his age. The girl explains that she has more than her sister. The guy says something in surprise, and Tsukasa Misaki shouts Lilifa. A woman apologizes for her sister's rudeness. A man with a bow and a man with a book are talking on the lakeshore. The guy says everything's fine, and Tsukasa Misaki says there's no need to apologize. The guy explains that before he knew it, she was already holding his hand. He says she helped him avoid further questions, but he felt awkward and needed to find something to talk about. The boy asks Lilifa how old she is, and the girl explains that she'll be turning a certain age this year. Lilifa laughs and asks him to think about how old they'll give her, and the woman explains that elves usually look younger than their age, given that. The guy says it's about 13, and Tsukasa Misaki says that's wrong and the correct answer is 10. The guy says, "Huh." He explains that she's just like her mother. She has human blood in her veins too, and everyone says she looks just like her. She explains that she will have big breasts like her mother. The woman says Venri needs her sister. The man replies that it's a lie and asks her not to try to distract him. The girl exclaims that he's at it again. The guy says no. The woman tells Leaf that it's true and that Venri is running here. The girl remains silent. The woman asks Lilifa to stay with Mr. Helian while she's busy. The man apologizes to Mr. Helian and says he'll be going out on business. The boy wishes his sister good luck and says, "Good." The woman asks her not to cause any inconvenience to Mr. Gelidin and his comrades. The guy says she's gone and says there's still a lot he wants to know. He says, "Hey," and explains that he doesn't know how to gather information anymore and wonders if Lilitha will be of any use. The guy says he'll marry her, and the girl asks him with a smile if he'll marry her. The guy looks dumbfounded and can't say anything. The guy asks if everything is okay. The girl explains that she just choked and asks why he brought it up, then asks her to marry him. The guy wonders why the girl brought it up so abruptly. The man says he's proposing to the first person he meets and asks what's wrong with her. The woman asks if he's really so handsome that the young princess fell in love with him at first sight. Tsukasa Misaki says that this is nonsense and definitely impossible, and also says that it is impossible no matter how you look at it. He says she's sad to admit it, but it's all really happening now, even though it's such an unrealistic scenario that it feels like she's in a dream. She explains that it's logical that this is all happening, and confirms that it's impossible to just go to another world. The boy tells Lilitha that he'll gladly agree, even though it's still a dream. Lilitha explains that it's not a dream, but the very real reality. The guy says they need to calm down first. Tsukasa Misaki explains that it's important to stay calm in moments like these and thinks it's the guy who needs to calm down. The girl says it's not a joke and asks the traveler's name, then says Helian and asks if he'll marry her. Helian explains it's not a joke, but advises him to think again, saying the girl doesn't even know his name. The woman says her breasts will be as big as her mother's and even bigger than her sister's. Tsukasa Misaki says she'll have truly enormous breasts. The guy says it's just big breasts and asks if they prefer small ones. The girl replies. The guy asks someone to save him, explains that he's frightened by the heavy aura behind him, and says he doesn't want to see the faces of those standing behind him right now, especially Reeves. The man says that this is a problem. The girl explains that her sister looks more like her father and has more elven blood, which is why she has small breasts. The man says that he already said this, and specifically about breasts. The guy says he's had enough of this nonsense and isn't going to waste any more time on nonsense, and asks if the girl wants to get married. The girl explains that he can't do that without her parents' permission and says they'll talk about the wedding once her parents are saved. The guy explains that an ancient Japanese tradition is to put off your problems. The man says that maybe it's not quite right to answer that way, but he's already overwhelmed with work and can't afford to waste time on the kids. The woman agrees and says that meeting her mom or dad will be problematic. The girl says that her sister and everyone else were simply caught. The woman says that elves really hate half-elves, so they could have killed mom, because she has big breasts, not like elven ones. The man says that he was very mistaken and that in front of him stood not a frivolous child, but a real member of the royal family of Late Stud. The woman says she can't go out because she's afraid of being seen. The man explains that if she doesn't go out, she won't be able to help. The woman says she's afraid of being caught and punished. The man says he'll take care of her and no one will know. The girl tells him that if he doesn't want to be noticed, it's best not to leave the room. The man explains that he has no intention of leaving and asks not to worry. The girl says this place is called the Wind Cave. Tsukasa Misaki explains that the force of the wind can be felt here and that this place is very important for their journey. He explains that in this world, elves live very long lives and do not die of old age, and the man says that elves can die from wounds or illnesses but not from old age. Tsukasa Misaki is nervous and adjusts his collar, then listens, after which he enters the room and tells his little sister that he is entering. A young and helpless princess thinks she can do something to help her kingdom, which is on the brink of extinction. Then a traveler appears who is strong enough to save her sister. An idea immediately occurs to her, and she tries to use this to save Late Stud. The guy says she has terrible thoughts. The man says she was ready to give everything for her country, but he considered her a frivolous child. The man says he can't marry the girl. He explains that even so, he doesn't know what he can do, and that he's a third party who doesn't see the whole picture. The guy says it's not that easy after all. The girl explains that here's how. The guy says that, but the guy says he wants to help as much as he can. The girl asks if this is true. The man says he can't do anything yet, but he'll try. The girl screams that it's enough, that this alone is enough. The man looks at her. Tsukasa Misaki reports that the smile was different from her usual forced grin and was her genuine smile. The guy says he'll do everything in his power and asks how he'll prove it. The girl agrees. The guy suggests a pinky swear. The man says pinky fingers, and the girl asks if she should cut off her pinky finger. The boy explains that it's some kind of magical oath to keep him from breaking his promise. Tsukasa Misaki asks if the oath is sealed and clarifies. Like this. The boy confirms that it is. The man says that she is now secured. The girl listens. Tsukasa Misaki announces that this is Chapter 6. Tsukasa Misaki explains that she's adding something to the pot. Tsukasa Misaki says that she's putting a packet of ingredients into the pot. The boy asks who the beast woman is, an adventurer, or one of the travelers Lady Leifa spoke of. The man replies that it is not so and explains that she is one of those travelers. The guy gives a list of spices: cinnamon, salt, black pepper. The guy says the word ignition, a frying pan with a dish being cooked, is depicted. There is no text or speech on stage. The guy asks what's in there, and the man says it smells so good. The girl calls the other one sister and asks if the food is ready. The woman explains that it's almost ready and offers to try it. A woman says, when a man hands her a spoon with food. The guy explains that the girl seems to like it, and that's the most important thing. Then he says, here you go. The girl asks if it's really okay. The man says yes, those were Helian's instructions. The girl says thank you and thanks the sacred tree for the grace. A boy says he's hungry. The man asks if they're serving food. Tsukasa Misaki calls everyone to come eat. The man says that Lady Lilifa liked it so they can eat. The woman says this food is even tastier than what they had in the castle. The girl listens. The boy wonders if he should tell them. He reports that the food situation in Latewood is very bad. The man explains that because the settlement has taken in those who fled the capital, there are now far more people living there than they can feed, and if this continues for a few more weeks, the food situation will inevitably worsen. The elf tells Helian to accept the gratitude of all the villagers for the treat. Helian says he only did what he could. Helian explains that he heard tales of the Lord of Darkness in the bottomless forest. The elf explains that if you turn to, the woman explains that there are many legends, such as the Forest of Illusions, the Blue Lands where travelers come, the Forbidden World of the Dead, and others, and that since ancient times, the bottomless forest has been considered a forbidden territory. She recounts that from time to time, a being appears from B. The man explains that such a beast has the power of a whole pack of magical beasts from an ordinary forest. It happens that sometimes entire squads are formed to fight it, but even this rarely turns out to be successful. The guy asks what happens if he can't get rid of the beast, and the girl explains that the beast usually goes on a rampage for a while, after which it returns to the bottomless forest. The woman explains that for the forest dwellers it is like a natural disaster, and they can only hide and wait until it passes. The boy remains silent. The man says it would be foolish to ask why the city was built in such a dangerous place. Tsukasa Misaki reports that this plot of land was the only place where the oppressed half-elves were able to settle. He explains that among other races, there are those who are not afraid to approach the bottomless forest. The half-elf explains that such people are found among humans and are called adventurers. The guy asks if they are adventurers. He says yes, and explains that they come to collect special resources in the bottomless forest. The man explains that there are adventurers who deliberately seek out magical beasts in the abyssal forest, probably because the abyssal beasts are rich in magical power, and many creatures become a source of special resources. The guy says that groups of adventurers come to Latestud of their own free will, and Tsukasa Misaki says that from their point of view this is madness. The elf explains that guests who stay overnight pay them in foreign currency, and so they are grateful for their visits. He says this is a perfectly reasonable policy. The man says that if money circulates only within the country, it will lead to a halt in development and that trade is necessary. But he hasn't seen any adventurers here. Tsukasa Misaki explains that there aren't any here now. Apparently, about a month ago, a horde of monsters attacked a border town nearby. The man reports that, as a result, an emergency meeting was declared. All the adventurers gathered and went to the border town. The attack was quite serious, so the situation was becoming dire. The man explains that 3 weeks ago, Noblewood declared war on their country, and immediately after those events, he was quite unresponsive. Man says he's been called humanity's shield. The guy says it's clear, then falls silent. He explains that he expected it to some extent and that a lot of it wasn't even mentioned in the game. The man explains that the demon race existed in Tactics Chronicle, and that Camilla, the commander of the 6th Corps, could actually be considered one of them, but on the other hand, he's never heard of demon territory. The man explains that he still has a lot to ask, but he's just... The guy reports that they seem to have been well received here and adds that it is wonderful. A guy asks if the small-bodied warrior is a cat, to which the man explains that she's small because she's half-halfling. The woman confirms this. A guy with horns tells another guy with cat ears. The guy says there are many races gathered here, including many half-elves, and he was very surprised to see dwarves. The elf explains that elves and dwarves essentially can't stand each other and asks if things are different for them. The girl says that Latestwood was built by the combined efforts of the various races of the time, and that this country was undoubtedly founded mostly by half-elves, confirming this with the word, definitely. The man listens. The man says that those who were weak and had no one to rely on huddled together and eventually founded a new country. He explains that it's a wonderful country. The woman says it is a proud country. Then, while Reeve was finishing distributing food, the girl says that she and Leifa were talking about all sorts of trivial things. The man explains that deep down, he feared she would ask for Riv and Eltana as valuable warriors. But to his surprise, she didn't even broach the subject. He explains that they didn't discuss anything of substance at all, only that Lilifa had been spoiled since childhood. When Lyra smiled, even in such a difficult situation, she gave the impression of a true leader. The guy says he could act the same way if cornered in a similar situation and that he doesn't have an ounce of confidence. The man says everything is fine and asks her to deliver it to him. The woman explains that they won't make their guests suffer. The girl invites her dog sister. Tsukasa Misaki says that if he can't win, he will die. Tsukasa Misaki explains that he doesn't want to die, but must fight. The man says that this is a virtual chat window and offers to open it, then says that this is the captain of the 2nd Corps, Baron Seifred. The guy reports that he was afraid he wouldn't be able to contact them outside of the bottomless forest, but luckily, that doesn't seem to be a problem. Outsiders can't see the virtual window. To them, it looks as if Tsukasa Misaki is simply looking up at the sky. Helian says that they somehow managed to successfully establish contact with the locals and asks if Tsukasa Misaki has encountered any new problems or changes. Send button. In the top right image, a man explains that everyone at the camp is busy preparing for the holiday and says the performance will begin soon. In the top right, a man and a girl with animal ears say they are glad to meet and offer to have a drink. In the bottom left, a girl with animal ears says she needs help with. Tsukasa Misaki says that if they can't find a way, they'll have to give up on their dream. The woman says she doesn't want to give up and will fight to the end. A man and woman sit in the forest across from a girl with a ponytail holding books, discussing the situation. The man says he can't afford to lose. The woman says it's Mr. Helian. The man remains silent. The guy explains that if the happiness level indicator remains extremely low, then the loyalty level falls below a certain value, there is a system of subordinate rebellions, and then there is a possibility of a violent rebellion. A man says the word rebellion. An emergency call from an ally was received via a magical artifact. They must be contacted immediately. The girl asks permission to apologize later for such rudeness. There are no speech bubbles or text in the image, the characters are not visible, and there is movement of leaves and tree branches. The woman says it is Mr. Helian. Tsukasa Misaki says that if they don't stop this now, everyone will die. The man explains that this is their last chance and they need to work together. The woman says she's ready to support them to the end. The woman tells him to protect the throne until she returns and not to let anyone touch it. The guy says this with a determined expression on his face. The woman tells Mr. Gemma that she asks him to forgive her rudeness. He says that it does not matter. And the man explains that he adheres too strictly to the rules of etiquette and needs to immediately return to the castle. Tsukasa Misaki says that if he can't win, he will die, and explains that it's not a joke. You can't rely on just taking the throne. Taking the throne by rebels won't result in immediate destruction, but with a decrease in happiness and morale, there will be significant limitations on the king's powers, starting with the virtual window of authority. This could be fatal for me. A group of people raised their swords. It is reported that this time the rebellion has broken out not in local cities, but in the imperial capital, and in addition to the loss of the throne, if certain conditions are met, this will be considered a success for the revolution. Then it will be the end and the end of the empire. The guy says that the devil. It is reported that the country ruled by the human king will be destroyed, and the corresponding player's character data will be completely deleted, which would mean total defeat. Tsukasa Misaki asks what will happen to her then. The man says that he will die, but it is all a dream, and asks someone to tell him that it is just a dream. A man in armor screams while fighting his opponents. A man in armor screams while fighting. A man in armor screams while striking. Gardage Bergelmir reports that there are only small fry here and introduces himself as the commander of the 5th Corps. Then expresses boredom. In the upper shot, he delivers a powerful blow to the enemy. Helian reports that the castle is now in sight and asks Eltona if she can detect the sound of battle inside the castle. The woman reports that everything is calm in the castle and the battle is going on somewhere in the surrounding area, but has not yet reached the castle. The woman explains to Reeve that he should avoid the battlefield and head to the castle first. Reeve says he understands. Then Reeve and the woman run down the hallway. The man tells Reeve to continue toward the throne. Reeve says he understands, and the woman praises him. The knights quickly move aside and make way, greeting His Highness and His Majesty. The man announces His Majesty's arrival and warns everyone to pay attention, while the girl says their master is already here. The guy asks what the situation is. The man on the left informs the Lord. The guy asks how things are going with them and whether no one tried to touch the throne. The man replies that as soon as they received the order, they immediately began to defend the throne. At the same time they gathered an additional elite squad, and no one touched the throne. The man explains that in this world there is only one way to survive, to kill. The guy is silent. The guy then asks what about the other commanders. The text below explains who the traitor is. They say that the ram is on their side, and if he was a traitor, the throne would have already been seized. And also Riv and Eltona show no signs of treason. The man with the beard asks what about the other commanders, and the girl then says. The man explains that some of them have their own characteristic traits, and that there are those who exhibit egoism, pleasure, and arrogance. He also explains that there are those who are naturally inclined toward chaos. The woman explains that Eltona's defining quality is harmony, and that what she prefers has a positive effect on resolving conflict between subordinates. The man explains that, on the other hand, there's chaos which can lead to foolish behavior, disregarding the impact on others. Among the 8 commanders, one is reported to have evil tendencies. The commander of the 5th Corps is acting independently, leading his own detachment and part of the 6th Corps' fighting force to deal with the rebels. The man reports that the remaining corps commanders are still following orders. The young man asks what's going on, who caused the uprising, and what the situation is with the rebels. Tsukasa Misaki says that the brute has used her subordinates to destroy everything in the area and asks what he did. The brute orders her to shut up. A man explains that the warriors of the Kenji clan do not give up or retreat, while another man explains that they fight for the honor and freedom of their people. The man advises not to think about it and hopes that these idiots will not come again. The guy sits up, leaning on his arm, and says, "Phew!" A man in armor stands outside. The knight asks Your Highness, and the man replies that no, and that he is just a little tired. The man explains that his fears were not unfounded, and that the shock left him unable to stand. He also recalls that he desperately held on to Reeve the entire way to keep from falling, so there's nothing surprising about that. Reeve says the man is in a surprisingly good mood, and the woman asks. Tsukasa Misaki says that in the midst of a rebellion, he speaks in good spirits and that speaking thoughtlessly is not in his nature. The man on the left reports that the suppression of the uprising is complete and orders everyone to go and inspect the state of the entire city. The woman on the right says that, looking at everything that's happening, she can't understand how this could have happened. The young man reports that the plan to suppress the rebellion following the Foundation Day celebrations was interrupted. He explains that the ogre's presence there meant that even the most foolish of ogres could stage an uprising. The young man adds that, by the way, if the king is absent, everything is quiet in the country. The guy says he can't afford to lose. A man reports that this horrific image is too realistic and lacks the censorship control of the ethnic code that should be present in the game. A bearded man shouts to the commander-in-chief that the uprising has been suppressed. The commander-in-chief explains that, apparently, the uprising has been suppressed. The guy says there's no need to worry. The man says they've protected the city well. The boy asks where the rebellion leader is, and the man replies that he seems to be lying there. The next panel shows the wounded rebellion leader in heavy armor, and the boy looks at him. The guy says that looking at his face is simply unbearable, although in a sense he himself wanted this result. It is reported that it is unacceptable to look away. The man says his commander doesn't forgive him for his manner of speech, even now. Tsukasa Misaki says there's a limit to everything and that he needs to maintain at least a modicum of decency with his soldiers. The man approaches the commander and asks if he'll be allowed to go now, as the corpses will be processed and disposed of here. The girl calls out to Garadii and asks him to stop, as the woman tells the two of them not to quarrel. The man stands aside. Tsukasa Misaki tells Reeve and Gardy to stop messing around. Then we see a woman with a gun running toward a group of people. Reeve yells at a huge monster. Tsukasa Misaki explains that in Tactics Chronicle, the weakest creature is the king. It is reported that death is confirmed at the moment of surprise attack. He does not have the techniques necessary to avoid an attack at close range. Therefore, the guy says that he is dying and is no longer a survivor. He does not want to die and asks someone to help, explaining that he will soon die and does not understand why this happened. The man says he can't believe this happened and says it's the end. Tsukasa Misaki explains that it's not the end and that they must keep fighting. The man explains that they've lost many people, but Tsukasa Misaki says they mustn't give up and must find a way to win. The woman says, "This is how it is." A bearded man stands behind her. The remaining frames show scenes of a battle. A hand in a spiked glove strikes the monster. Then the man's hand drops down next to a sword. The weakest king, Helian, betrayed by the people of his own country, died. The guy reports that he had a dream and a vague realization came to him that it could all be a dream, as if enemy troops were still pursuing, and this army was huge. The man says that from elves and dwarves to demons, devils, fairies, and magical beasts, and the very last one is a herd of dragons, an amorphous non-human race, similar to slime and ghosts. It is reported that all races were gathered in one place, and it was a mixed core of representatives of different races, which is vaguely remembered. It is also said that on the other side there are soldiers under command. There are few of them. The man reports that there are 3 pieces for 8 spaces, and 2 of them have already been destroyed. He explains that the only thing left in his hands is a perfectly crafted wolf piece. In other words, all his power. The man says there's no chance of winning. For Tsukasa Misaki, Tactics Chronicle was a dreamlike world. The guy says that's why, while seeking romance and teaching his close friends, he continued to pursue his ideals. He reports that the result of further progress was, in short, the end point of the dream. The man explains that the main figure is completely compressed and it is impossible to return from here, no matter how strong the ladder is. The man reports that it will still be mercilessly destroyed with a difference in combat power of 100,000 to 1. The man explains that even he, determined as he was, destroyed other cities, weaving a 150-year-long story, thinking that his turn would one day come. He says he was prepared for the final end, and now that the moment has arrived, without flaunting his clumsiness, he acts. The image contains no text or speech, only an abstract pattern. Tsukasa Misaki says it's terrifying as hell and explains that he actually witnessed the horrific ending, and the emotions are simply overwhelming. He says he's terrified. He reports that the miniature garden she loved was not such a terrible reality. But it is not at all what was promised. The guy says that it should be a world of dreams and fantasy and the game itself should be fun, but if you look up, there, the man reports that it is a bloody, lethal weapon that crushes skulls. The man raises a war mace, preparing to strike. The boy is screaming, choking. The woman tells him to calm down and not panic. The image lacks characters and text. The scene is an interior with windows and part of a bed. The guy is breathing heavily and trying to come to his senses. He says, "Hare, ha hare." Then the guy looks at his hands and is silent. Afterwards, he stands and continues breathing heavily, saying, "Hi, ha." Tsukasa Misaki says this is the royal bedroom. The boy says this with uncertainty. The woman says it's Mr. Gelman. The guy asks Reeve and Reeve says he can't. Tsukasa Misaki says that thank God he finally woke up. The guy remains silent. The guy says it was a dream. Tsukasa Misaki says she won't give up this time and says she will definitely win. The guy explains what's going on and asks how. The man says he's sure he was heading to the site of the uprising and adds, "The man says it can't be true and states it's impossible." The man explains it doesn't make sense. The guy says KH and remembers that he was recently killed, but does not understand what happened. The woman reports that they are ogres and that something strange happened to the rebels. The man tells Mr. Gellan to remain calm. The woman says he shouldn't get out of bed now, as he's been asleep for more than half the day. The guy asks what's going on and says he doesn't remember falling asleep at all. Tsukasa Misaki says that it wasn't a dream, but rather her own memories, and wonders if it means something. The guy asks if he was killed by that red ogre, and the girl confirms it. The guy is silent, clenching his fist, then looks forward with tension and sweats. The guy reports that it worked and asks about automatic respawn. In Tactics Chronicle, the death of the king does not immediately end the game. The man reports that there are limited options. He explains that Helian was killed once and then resurrected. The guy says Riv and the girl replies ah. The boy asks if the throne is safe and what happened to the rebels and that red ogre. The girl reports that the throne is completely safe. The 2 core elite under Baron's command have strengthened the defenses, and this time, every single rebel has been destroyed. The woman says that, as for their leader, he seemed to have unique abilities. A guy reads the description of a skill that activates a normal attack upon death and performs a sneak attack on the nearest enemy unit if there's one within range. The guy says this is the final blow and asks if the counterattack ability really only works once upon death. The commander of the V-Guard Corps was firmly convinced he had eliminated all the rebels, so Reeve and Eltona were on guard. His control over the dead man's own body had been successful. He acted carelessly when approaching him, but Helian stood next to the ogre, who possessed unique abilities. The boy says he's very sorry. Tsukasa Misaki explains that, although she was supposed to be guarding, such carelessness is unforgivable and there's no excuse. She's willing to accept any punishment and asks for it to be hers. He says that if he can't win, he will die, and asks them not to feel sorry for him. He explains that he doesn't want any of them to suffer because of him. The boy says he can't afford to lose. The man explains he can't afford to lose. The guy says that if he can't win, he'll die. Then he says that if he dies, he won't be able to see Tsukasa Misaki. The man says he can't afford to relax because if he does, he will die. The guy tells Reeve to come to him. Reeve tells him his name. The guy says he can come closer and sit on the bed. The girl remains silent and sits on the bed. The guy says he can't take it anymore and is going to end it. The woman says she can't take it anymore and asks not to make her suffer. The man reports that his hand. The girl says she doesn't want this to be just a game and asks not to be offended. She explains that she wants the guy to be by her side all the time. The guy says that he wants to be with her forever, and Tsukasa Misaki says that she also wants to be with him forever. The image contains no text or speech, only an image of the character. A guy touches a girl's face, who has tears in her eyes. He puts his hand on her cheek and hugs her. The boy touches his face. The boy says he hears a knock. The knocking sound continues, and it can be heard in the large hall where the boy and girl are sitting. The guy makes heartbeat sounds, and the girl reports that her cheeks are flushed. Her hair feels soft to the touch, and she has a faint smell. It is also reported that Tsukasa Misaki reports that tears taste slightly salty. The guy says this image definitely indicates there is no impending threat. The girl remains silent. The guy reports that there is no pack of monsters surrounding the throne, all the leaders of the 8 Corps are alive and well, and the country is safe, and what he saw earlier was just a dream, but what is happening now is not a dream. The man asks if there have been any other serious problems besides the ogre uprising. Tsukasa Misaki says there are many minor issues, but nothing serious that could shake the country. The man asks him to take his time, calm down, and answer slowly. Tsukasa Misaki tries to. The guy says he wants to know about the other commanders. He reports that they are still carrying out royal orders. Eltona and Gardi give instructions to their army and await further orders from you. The young man informs them that the commander of the 5th Corps remains responsible for maintaining public order, and if another uprising occurs, they should be told to act at their own discretion unless he gives them any instructions. The young woman asks if he's sure about that. The young man says he's not against it and was definitely killed at the time of the event under the responsibility of the 5th Corps commander. He also wonders whether anyone else would have been able to predict the ogre's counterattack, given human capabilities. The woman explains that the 3rd Corps commander needs to monitor the destruction of buildings and the wounded during. The man explains the concept of role-playing, where you play by your own rules. He says that if the king engages in frivolous conversations in a simple tone, his worldview becomes dull. The woman explains that it's perfectly natural for Tsukasa Misaki to simply go with the flow. The man says he wants to say this, in order to learn to behave like a king, learning the proper etiquette while eating in the real world was the right decision. The girl asks if Your Majesty would like anything else. Tsukasa Misaki says thank you, he appreciates her efforts, there will be enough after the riv, and that she can clean up here. Tsukasa Misaki notes that it tastes sweet. The guy says that before, when he played the game Tactics Chronicle, he didn't feel any taste. The man remains silent, then says that he felt it back when he was drinking a drink in Lateswood. The boy says he wants to return to reality and his home. He explains that he spent most of his youth playing Tactics Chronicle, which he enjoyed as a form of entertainment, and he really loved it. He says he first needs to figure out the cause of the transformation, although there's too little basic information to formulate a hypothesis. The guy explains the difference between Tactics Chronicle and this world, says that at first you can use all kinds of normal window disguises, and also says that there are functions that provide information exchange and tactics for information and combat support, communication for long-distance communication, and basic functions like a camera and an information log. The man explains that the problem is that in Tactics Chronicle, other people can't see the virtual window. He explains that, as far as sharing information goes, there doesn't seem to be a problem with that. The guy asks what about reviving subordinates and explains that in Tactics Chronicle you can revive not only players but also monsters, but the king has a different specificity and there are many restrictions. It is reported that, firstly, only citizens of one's own country or satellite countries can be revived. It is reported that only those monsters whose full names are known to the player can be resurrected, while monsters that have been dead for more than 24 hours will not be resurrected. The voiceover states that the total number of subordinates is doubled per subordinate, and explains that there is an upper limit to the number of revivals. The guy says he can't eat anymore because he's already full, and explains that it's not because the food tastes bad. It is reported that all that is known about the current situation is that they are surrounded by a dangerous forest called the Abyssal Forest, and that Lateswood and Noblewood are currently in the midst of an interracial conflict. It is reported that in these surroundings the forces of only 2 powerful countries are concentrated, and from the point of view of the balance of power of each country existing in this world, it is interesting to know what is the position of our chimera in relative comparison with national power. The guy explains that the country's internal politics also can't be ignored for long, since there has already been one uprising, and if another uprising occurs, it will be dangerous if the country's internal problems are not addressed along with research. The man says that this time the number of revivals will be limited. The life reserve is up to 6 lives. The same applies to the king. The man states that since he recently died, he has 5 lives left, and if he dies 5 more times, the 5th death will be final. Tsukasa Misaki explains that if you use up all your lives, it means the end of the game in Tactics Chronicle and the deletion of all character data. Then he truly. There is a fork and a knife on the table next to an empty plate. The woman says there's only one person in the city who can help, and he's currently at the castle. The man explains that this person is the king and must be very busy. Tsukasa Misaki explains that if the king agrees, he can solve the problem. The guy tells Reeve he has one question for her and asks her to answer it as she thinks, even if she doesn't understand his intentions. Reeve agrees. The guy says there's one thing that needs to be checked. Reeve answers well. The boy says he thinks of the weak, those weaker than him. Tsukasa Misaki confirms this. The girl explains that she recently helped Reifa and asks what the boy thinks of her. The woman says she can't understand why he doesn't want to fight, since he's stronger than everyone else. She explains that if he doesn't fight, no one will be able to protect her. Tsukasa Misaki says she thinks she's strong. The guy asks if she's strong and remains silent. The guy says he believes the girl's fighting ability is significantly inferior to his. The girl says that's true. The guy claims that if they fight, he will win. The woman says that even if they fight 1,000 times, she will win just as many times, and says that Rafa and the others understand this too. The girl explains that she didn't act mean or vile, and says that they were equals. He reports that after arriving in the village, the entire latest wood was going through very difficult times, and at the same time they continued to gather all the villagers. The man says that even those who are inferior in strength were drawn into an unwanted war, and the reason the villagers didn't despair is likely due to her upbringing and behavior. Tsukasa Misaki explains that she felt strong because of her appearance. The guy says that this lifestyle in itself is not considered strong. The man explains that the girl is weaker than him in terms of combat ability, but she is inferior to him in terms of quality of life, and asks if he has considered such a term as the law of nature. The texts state that the world of monsters is a world in which the weak fall prey to the strong. If you are strong, you will. The woman says no, not at all. The boy asks why this is so. Tsukasa Misaki explains that she is a resident of Archimera, and in her early years she was a weak monster, but Helian-sama did not abandon her and continued to raise her. She explains that she deeply believes in following not the law of strong against weak, but the law of. It was reported that only the betrayal of a few commanders could cause damage to the entire nation, and if Helian was deemed unworthy of bearing the title of king, then a rebellion would begin again, but this time it was quickly suppressed. At first, he says that the only thing that scares him is the possibility of betrayal, and even if he rules the country, the day of collapse will always come, which will be like slow suicide, but on the other hand, it's wrong to suspect everyone. The guy says that's how it is and how interesting it is. Then he announces that he's already decided everything, and since that's the case, he's decided. The guy announces that in 5 hours a meeting will be held with every commander, except those who are busy and fulfilling their duties, and orders that all commanders be told to gather. The girl says she understands. The girl says she understands and will do so. The man says he'll rely on Reeve from now on, and the girl replies she'll let him know right away and agrees. Tsukasa Misaki says he'll do his best to live up to expectations. The man replies, okay. The guy says that in this world there is only one way to survive, to become stronger, and explains that to do this you need to constantly train and not give up. The man explains that when he looked at the situation in the capital in the database, people's happiness levels were lower than before. He says this is likely due to people continuing to experience stress due to the transformation phenomenon, and says it can't be ignored. The guy says that the best way to cope is to eliminate the cause of the stress itself, but this does not guarantee that they will be able to return to the previous world, and that there is no guarantee that the lost territories will be immediately returned. The man says, and asks, a meeting? He says that a meeting will be held on this very occasion, and that it is the best way to dispel public anxiety, however. A man says that at an event meeting at Tactics Chronicle, if you use the key language and then try to pronounce a certain number of words, the effect will be positive, and the meeting will be considered a success. The man reports that conversations with Reeve in the office confirmed that the key language makes no sense. The guy says that it is possible to play all this out and dispel public anxiety with his performance. Tsukasa Misaki says he doesn't rely on the system and bases his actions on these words. The woman says they won't fight this time, but will simply walk together. The man explains that this is because they want to conserve their strength for the next battle. The woman explains that they need to be careful and not lose focus. The man says they must move quickly and without delay. The commander of the First Corps, the commander of the Guard Army, the Moonwolf Riv, and the commander of the second corps, the head of the knightly order of beasts, the lion with the sword baron. The commander of the third corps is the leader of the Holy Spirit detachment, a white fairy from the age of the gods, Eltana. The commander of the fourth corps is the leader of the mage army, the dark elf heretic Ceres. The commander of the fifth corps is the leader of a powerful ogre army, the founder of the Garde giant clan. The man thanks them for their efforts and announces that they can ascend. He explains that he asked everyone to gather so he can tell them that they know almost nothing about this continent, although they have some information about its history and surroundings, and have heard some things from Reeve about the power of the elves, and the boy explains that there are many different races in this world, and they all live together. The woman explains that elves have long lives and wisdom, and the girl with horns adds that this helps them maintain peace and order. The guy asks what happened and if anyone has any questions, and then tells them not to be shy. The guy explains that a virtual window is a panel invisible to other people, and a map is essentially another type of virtual window he uses to access geospatial information. The girl apologizes and asks what virtual windows and maps are. Tsukasa Misaki explains that there are many races in this world, each with their own characteristics and abilities, and explains that they have gathered together to discuss important issues and find common ground. The man explains that despite their differences, they must all work together for a common goal. The girl says it's important to understand each other, and the boy ponders whether others should remain unaware of the king's abilities and whether they consider it a special power distinct from magic. The man says that in that case it's better to maintain a little mystery to reduce the risk of rebellion. The guy says they won't talk about it for now, and the girl says that although they have received a lot of different information from Lateswood, it is still not enough. The boy asks if the only two countries they know of have influence in this area and wonders if there's a power that can rival them. The man replies that he doesn't know yet. The guy says that the situation is quite serious, and it is necessary to gather even more information in order to, as before, determine one's position and further political course. The guy says his interlocutors tried very hard to suppress the uprising. The man says nothing of the sort happened, and that their boss was almost killed. The man says he has no excuse for this and will accept any punishment. The young man asks what to do and says he will impose punishment, explaining that the head of the 5th Corps and the entire 5th Detachment, under the direction of the commander of the 7th Corps, must provide financial assistance to those who lost their homes and begin building temporary housing. The man clenches his fist. The guy informs that the interlocutor is taking command of the head of the 2nd Detachment, Baron, and explains that in case of problems with public safety, it is necessary to contact him. The boy says he'll obey the ram's orders for a while and asks if he accepts this as punishment. The man reveals the name Gardy. The man remains silent, then says that the punishment might have been too severe. The man explains that nothing could have been done about this incident and understands that the situation was very difficult to handle, but on the other hand, the ruler is obligated to assign rewards and punishments, which is why he imposed this punishment. Tsukasa Misaki explains that such a reaction is too humiliating a punishment. The voice announces that Reeve and Eltona will be next, and then explains that first of all, they need to do their duties to the best of their ability, and they will talk about punishment later. Gummin says that now, speaking of specific actions, he wants Riv and Eltonu as his guards when he heads to Latest Wood again. He explains that Latest Wood is currently the most important and only source of information, and if they visit Latest Wood again, it will be necessary to ensure its security. Tsukasa Misaki informs him that Camilla will also be going with him to Latest Wood and won't have to focus on protecting him. Camilla says she'll do as she's told. Tsukasa Misaki explains that Camilla will be searching for all sorts of useful information in L settlements. He says he's not going to give up this time. The girl says that this is her specialty and she understands what he's saying. The guy asks her, explaining that when it comes to gathering information, she has no equal, adding that you could say so. The man says the girl is the Archimedes Ushiai and expects her to fulfill this role by demonstrating her incredible abilities. Tsukasa Misaki declares that he will certainly live up to his expectations. The man responds with silence and expresses doubt. Leo says there's nothing in this world that can't be conquered. The woman with the scythe explains that if you don't give up, you can find a way out of any situation. The boy with glasses says he wants to try too. The man with long hair says he has a plan. The man with the beard and the woman with long hair. The man expresses confusion. Tsukasa Misaki says that this fiery gaze is clearly hiding something and asks if everyone has it like that. The man asks what's going on. It is reported that only Camilla behaves differently, and she looks at the others with obvious satisfaction. The guy says he can't afford to relax because an enemy could appear at any moment. The guy says that it is reported that this is what it is. The woman tells Reeve that, as the king's confidant, he has spent a lot of time with her and asks him, as the eyes of our chimera, to watch her every step as before. Lev says that Baron didn't use all his weapons, but still killed many enemies and is the Archimere's claw. The boy says he doesn't know what will happen next, but expects Baron to use his claws with full force and responsibility in an emergency. The woman informs Eltona that she plays a central role in the internal affairs of our chimera and will be able to show the greatness of our chimera to other countries, calling it the mane of our chimera, and also explains that the magnificent mane will indicate their authority to everyone in this world. The woman explains to Ceres that he wields magic and creates various techniques, being the language of the Archimera, and is certain that even the earth will turn to ash at the melody of his speech. The man tells Gardy that he possesses incredible strength and a powerful body, being the hand of the Archimera, and the guy explains that the weapon is created using advanced technology that has no equal, and says that this gives their army even more power. The boy speaks to Nogar. Nogar explains that he controls the renowned dragons on the battlefield and in the sky, that he is the wings of Archimere, and asks him to henceforth demonstrate the country's greatest firepower. Nogar confirms that he understands and calls his interlocutor his king. The guy says their country is in a critical situation and suggests taking action, expecting everyone to put in the hard work. Another guy confirms this and says that's it. Then the guy makes a sound. The commander-in-chief reports that the trees have mostly been brought under control, but there are no travelers in sight. He orders them to get up and move on. The man asks for Lady Mlifa to be released and says he won't forgive her if she gets even the slightest scratch. The girl asks for her release and begs for it. The man asks what the girl is babbling about and calls her a half-breed. Then the man says his ears are rotting from her chatter and orders her to go, explaining that this message is not enough for them. Tsukasa Misaki reports that the master ordered her to play the role of a helpless friend lost in the abyss and asks if the man is planning to put a spoke in her wheel. The man replies that he doesn't understand what she's even talking about. Camilla explains that she's doing the best she can. The guy says not to talk about trifles and reports that they are approaching the settlement, so everyone needs to be on guard. The leaves are falling. Tsukasa Misaki says he smells blood and calls out to Mr. Helian. Mr. Helian asks what happened, turning to Riva. The woman reports that something happened on the side of the settlement and there is so much blood there. The boy shouts for them to run faster. Tsukasa Misaki replies that he obeys. The girl and the woman watch the scene with tension. The guy says it's impossible, and the girl with long hair and the guy with the cloak watch the destruction of the village. A man reports that there has been an attack in the village and everyone is in a panic. The man explains that urgent action is needed and everyone must prepare for defense. The man explains that something happened in the camp and there's a noise. The man examines the wounded man and reports that the wound is deep and the bleeding needs to be stopped immediately. Tsukasa Misaki explains what this means. The woman tells Eltona to tend to the wounded. The man yells at Riva not to kill the enemies and orders everyone to prepare for an enemy attack, expressing irritation. The woman shouts that they shouldn't be fooled by the treatment and calls them Noblewood supporters. The man tells Venri to lower her bow and asks her to wait. The woman explains that they were simply gathering information about them because of Lady Lilifa and warns Lady Leifa that she... The guy says what's going on with Lilifa and remains silent. The girl with the headband says, "Archers, prepare yourselves." The woman informs Venri. The woman explains that she is now the queen of this country and orders everyone to obey her orders. The guy apologizes to a woman named Leifa and asks to listen to him first. Then he asks to let Edna heal the wounded. The woman says she's extremely grateful, but they have too many wounded and it would be wonderful if they could save at least some of their lives. Tsukasa Misaki explains that there's no need to worry about this and calls upon the heavenly rain, asking for mercy and the answer to their prayers. A woman raises her bandaged arm and looks at it. A man with a bandage on his head and bandages on his body looks at the woman's arm. A group of wounded people sit on the ground in the rain, watching the scene unfold. The woman explains that if there's no rain, there will be no harvest, and then everyone will die. The man says they need to pray for rain. The woman says they must do everything they can to make it happen. The man says they've already tried, but so far to no avail. A young man explains to a man that rain is a blessing from the gods and asks him not to be afraid. The man explains that it hasn't rained in their village for a long time, and they are very happy about its return. A group of people raise their hands to the sky and rejoice at the rain. The guy reports that these people are now okay and asks if there are any more wounded. The boy looks at the many bodies covered with sheets and says that this is all that remains of the people he knew. He explains that he is now alone. The boy asks Tsukasa Misaki if he understood correctly that they were demanding the handover of the traveler and the elf by sunset tomorrow. Tsukasa Misaki confirms and explains that in exchange for the residents of Latewood, they will return Lilifa and the others. The young man informs Lady Leifa that he's sorted out all the circumstances of the incident and that they have nothing to do with Noblewood, and he wanted to clarify this with her. Lady Leifa says she knows this and hasn't doubted it for a minute since they met. The man says that he was rescued back in the forest and explains that the elf whose army attacked them last night is the commander-in-chief of the hunter, and his name is Noblef Saravin Vert. Tsukasa Misaki says the hunter, explaining that in the human army he would be called a general, and that is one of the positions in elven military affairs. It is reported that there is also an elder and a great elder, and in wartime a hunter controls the soldiers. The guy asks why Eltana is the target. The man explains that they didn't get along and he didn't even mention the name of Riva, who almost killed him. The girl apologizes and says that she doesn't know the details. The man explains that it's a burial tower built from the bodies of fallen warriors and says it will burn to the ground. Tsukasa Misaki says it's horrific. The man explains that burning bodies is an ancient custom so that the souls can pass on peacefully. The guy says he can't afford to lose. The guy asks the girl if she has anything to tell them and says he doesn't think they attacked without reason. Tsukasa Misaki says he has something he wants to tell them. The guy asks if they could release Lilify and the others, who were kidnapped by Noblewood. He repeats the word release with a questioning intonation. The guy says they won't just give them up. The woman says it's beyond her power, and that obeying Noblewood's orders will only bring even more trouble upon Lateswood. The man says that Lateswood's life as a country is coming to an end. He explains that as a result of the attack at the beginning of the war, they lost half their soldiers. It is reported that even Leifa herself was forced to fight, and this is truly a state of despair. It is reported that the time of the Lateswood has come to an end, but all efforts have led to complete failure. It is said that their power does not belong to Noblewood. They are said to be so strong that they are capable of defeating a hunter. They have no prejudice against half-elves, and they appeared. Tsukasa Misaki explains that, in Leifa's mind, they are her last hope, like a miracle sent by the gods. He says he mustn't give in to emotions and can't allow himself to think of them as poor or want to help, as these are unacceptable thoughts. The guy says there's nothing in this world that can't be fixed. The girl says that if that's true, then she can try to change this world too. The man explains that it will be very difficult, but it's worth a try. The boy approaches the girl and says she asked them to rescue the prisoners by force and asks what they will receive in return if they fulfill her request. The girl reveals that she is Leaf's mistress. The man is silent. The boy says that if there's some kind of prize, that's a different matter, and asks her to come up with a reason for him to help, explaining that he wants to provide something for his people in Arkhimere so they'll understand his actions. Tsukasa Misaki gives her all. The girl explains that the Nob Queen who was kidnapped by humans. The woman says she is still an untouched girl and believes this gives her an added advantage when trading. The boy says that what will happen to Latestvud then, and Lilifu will take his place. The woman says that Venri will help her, and she believes Lilifu will be able to become a worthy queen. The woman says that after the deal you can demand anything from her. She will have all her rights and will satisfy any desire, so she asks to save her people. The boy says he can't help because he doesn't know what to do. The girl explains that if he doesn't help, she'll die. The man says he can't let her die and places his hand on the ground. The man and the girl bend over. The man says he'll try to save her. The woman reports that she cannot afford to relax. The boy says they can't afford to lose this chance. The men explain that if they don't burn the village down, they'll all be killed. The guy says that a ruler shouldn't do that and explains that she bowed her head to a simple traveler. On the right, a man in a cloak stands with his back to the scene, and in front of him are 3 women kneeling, one of whom is lying on the ground. On the left, 2 women are also kneeling, watching the scene. The woman explains that it is vital for a ruler to place himself above others, and all because this is equivalent to the removal of his powers. The woman says she chose to do this in front of her subjects. Tsukasa Misaki explains that she deliberately bowed her head in the very center of the village so that others could see it, all for the sake of saving her people. The guy explains that he is the king of Archimera and must take responsibility for his orders, and also explains that what they can gain and lose are absolutely not equally powerful things, and that helping in such a difficult time is complete recklessness. Even Tsukasa Misaki's position is precarious now, and she reports that getting involved in other countries' squabbles was a foolish decision. Exactly, no one will forgive such a stupid king. The voice says that he is the people of Archimera. At the very beginning he was just a weak monster, but Mr. Helian did not get rid of him but helped him grow. The boy says it's not his place to say they should prey on the weak, and that it's an insult to Lord Helian. Tsukasa Misaki explains that she shouldn't follow the principle of the strong devour the weak, and believes in the laws created by Lord Helian in Archimai. The guy says he is confident in the laws created in Archimere. Helian Ed Ursanok announces that he wishes to discuss a matter with Reeve, Eltona, and Camilla. Eltona, Camilla, and Reeve agree. Lev confirms Leifa and Natesvud's request to form a rescue squad from their country, and explains that since the very establishment of the state, ideas of mutual aid and saving the weak have flourished in her country. He explains that all the inhabitants possess an unwavering spirit and do not give up until the very end. The woman says there are none. Tsukasa Misaki says that Mr. Helian. In the background, armored figures are depicted with spears and a banner. In the foreground, a man unfurls his cloak, revealing a pattern on his back. The woman says that it is wonderful and asks for her hand, then says that it is decided and names the Queen of Latestwood as Leifa Lim Latestwood. The woman tells Mr. Helian that she wants to understand what he is saying and asks a question. The boy says he wants to tell the whole truth about himself and reveal his real name. The girl says that on this day and at this very moment they become brothers with the people of Latewood and wants to thank them with all her heart. Helian Ed Ursanok announces that he is the ruler of the magical kingdom of Archimere and welcomes everyone to Archimere, a kingdom from another world. A man asks another if he's heard the latest news and says that crowds are already gathering in the square in front of the royal castle, and he wonders what kind of speech their king will give. The second man confirms he's heard the news and suggests they hurry, as standing around isn't worth it. A voice from the balcony warns the crowd. Tsukasa Misaki says that she guessed from the very beginning that he was not just a traveler, but she could not even imagine that such a huge country existed. The woman says that she bows before his greatness and explains that only the king and 3 monsters participated in the creation of this country. The guy explains that they were a small fox beastman and a low-ranking cat, and their starting base was a very ordinary house. He says they didn't even have weapons, and the expedition against the wandering goblin was a real challenge for them. But they won with the help of an old sword. The man reports that the king gradually began to gather supporters, who fought together with all their might for a single cause and experienced many victories and defeats. And after 120 years, Archimera became the strongest kingdom. The woman asks 120 years. The woman reports that this year marks the 150th anniversary of the kingdom's creation. The man says their country will enter a new era. The man explains that this hall contains the armor of all the kings who ever ruled. He explains that each suit of armor symbolizes the strength and power of its owner. The image shows a close-up of a mechanical or robotic object emitting bright light and energy. Dynamic lines are visible, emphasizing the object's power and activity, but there is no speech or text. In the top panel, a man stands on a high tower, In the bottom panel, a man addresses a large gathering of soldiers and knights gathered in the square in front of the tower. The image contains no text or speech from the characters, only an image of a large castle and a crowd of people in front of it. The man announces that the army is ready to march. The man explains that all soldiers are fully prepared and awaiting orders. The man explains that the offensive will begin shortly. The girl with ears and a tail looks forward, intently observing what is happening. The guy thanks the citizens for all of them gathering today. The boy explains that they and the capital were transported to another location due to unknown circumstances, and the entire surrounding space is lost, with only the castle and the capital being teleported so far. He says that all that now surrounds them is the unknown. In other words, another world, about which they have learned little. The man reports that they are now in complete isolation from the outside world, and that the people gathered here are the only population of their country. The guy says that he has no way to return them to the old world, and reports that the population density in the capital has increased sharply, and food supplies will only last for a couple of months. A woman explains that the forest surrounding the capital is full of dangers. A man explains that this area is roamed by a huge number of terrifying monsters. The guy says that this is a rather scary time for them. He knows absolutely nothing about the reason for their teleportation, but he says that they have lost their homeland and most of the population, and now they have only 1/100th of what they had before the transition to another world. A group of people announces that their country is the end of our chimera. A girl explains this while standing in front of the crowd. In the background is a city with many buildings and people. Tsukasa Misaki asks if there are anyone here who thought so, and why they have such thoughts. The young man explains that 2 days ago, a turning point in the country's life occurred, and that they celebrated the 150th anniversary of the founding of the state. He says that today everyone has gathered to celebrate 150 years of pride, and asks if they will allow this pride to be taken away from them. The boy says no, wars and natural disasters haven't broken them. He explains that they are proud because they have survived many trials over 150 years, including trials sent by the gods, as well as all adversity through their own strength. The girl informs them that their elite 8 leaders have gathered here. The guy says that so what if during the heyday of their state such a critical situation occurred, they have such a strong state, our chimera, and that there is nothing surprising in the fact that today everyone has gathered here because of the fierce struggle. Tsukasa Misaki says that if the people side with him in this difficult test, he must shout their agreement with all his might. He then explains that their country is not the only one involved in this test, and reveals that besides them, there is another nation in the northeast, their name. The woman explains that the country's ideas are similar to theirs in many ways, and that they have taught her many new things. However, Latewood lacks a large army, and for this they are grateful for their humanity. She explains that they are oppressed in terrible conditions, but this has not broken their resolve. The guy reports that Latestvad is currently under attack by a pure-blooded elven state. The man explains that the name of this elven country is Noblewood, and it is common for them to oppress people who are of both elven and human blood, all because they despise the lowly races that descended from humans. The voice says that this is the only reason they're killing the people of Latewood, and that not only have they destroyed the village, but the girl also says that they've taken the little princess and several hundred villagers hostage. Tsukasa Misaki says that this is the height of impudence and reports that they also set the condition of exchanging the kidnapped people for their commander of the 3rd Division, Elton. The woman says they will fight. He says he has no desire to follow their lead. The knights say they will oppose illogical cruelty, and that this is how their people have lived all this time. The man explains that he will also accept the people of Latewood as his brethren, and that's why he has decided to attack the cruel country of Noblewood. He says he will try to establish a dialogue with Noblewood. The man explains that this is why he has decided to entrust this war entirely to his magical beings. A man with a beard and scars listens, and a girl with long hair looks worried. Another man smiles. The upper left fragment depicts a crowd of people. A group of people explains that these monsters are called Archimera. The man says he's a weak king and asks who will be his eyes, then says he's waiting for an answer from Archimera. The woman says they will become the first sacred army and will be the eyes of the great king, as well as the eyes of the Archmare. The man asks the archmare where the claws are that will tear apart the enemy instead of the weak king. The man says they will be the archmare's claws. The warrior declares that they will become the second sacred army and the claws of the heroic king. The man asks Archimera who will become the mane that displays dignity in place of the weak king. The man declares that they will be Archimera's mane. The woman announces that they will become the third sacred army, explains that theirs is the smartest king, and says that they will become his mane. The boy says, "Then, Archimera, where is the language that will cast spells in place of the weak king?" and offers to become the fourth sacred army. The girl says they will become the language of the Archimera, as well as the language that casts spells. The boy then says, "Archimera, where are the hands that will break down the walls, instead of your weak king, and that they will be the fifth sacred army?" The man declares that they will become the hands of Archimera and will be his hands. O courageous king! The orcs shout a battle cry. The man turns to the archmare and informs her that those ears will then receive all the information instead of the weak king. The woman says they will become Archimera's ears, the sixth sacred army, who will learn all information about the honest king. The boy asks Archimera where the legs are that will support everything in place of the weak king. Tsukasa Misaki says they will be Archimera's legs. The guy then tells Archimera who will become the wings that rule the great sky instead of the weak king, and says that they will be Archimera's wings. The boy announces that they will become his sacred army and praises the king, saying that his wings rule the great sky. The man explains that they will follow the king's orders, calling them invincible monsters, and calls on them to guide the weak king Helian, as he. The elf explains that she can't use magic because she has no mana. She explains that mana is the energy needed to cast magic. The woman says this place is a bridge that connects two worlds and explains that here you can meet those who have passed away. She explains that the wind brings with it the memories and feelings of those who were once nearby. Tsukasa Misaki reports that the monsters of the Archmire Kingdom have given their first war cry in another world, and thus, Queen Leifa says that an incredible scene appeared before her eyes, and she thought that Archimera might change the laws of this world. Tsukasa Misaki explains that this temple is home to a spirit who can grant a wish if you appeal to it correctly. She explains that to do so, you need to give a coin, ring a bell, and make a wish. The man says that this is a place where you can hide from the light. The man explains that if someone sees the light, they will immediately start looking for the source. The man explains that in the darkness, you can calmly observe what's happening. The man apologizes and says he couldn't protect her, and they ended up in this place. Tsukasa Misaki explains that they shouldn't move, otherwise the wounds will open up, and that they're just scratches, but she's more concerned about the man's condition. The boy says he's fine and there's nothing to worry about, and the girl asks him to calm down and just lie down. The man explains that Lady Lilifa and Her Majesty the Queen are not visible here and suggests they're probably just somewhere else. The boy tells her that his older sister and the traveler will be coming for them soon, and the girl explains that they'll have to be patient for a while. The man reveals that he's the traveler, and the girl asks if she can trust him, to which the man replies that of course. Tsukasa Misaki says that the traveler Gelman is simply an amazing person who saved his older sister from the commander-in-chief of the Hunter. He reports that he also promised to help them to the best of his ability. A man yells, "Hey," and calls a girl an unclean girl. The man demands that Tsukasa Misaki come out and says she's being presumptuous. The guy says he'll be fine. The girl asks what he's going to do with a calm face. He explains that he'll be useful later. The boy says there's no need to worry. The girl says she'll be back and that her older sister will definitely come for them. The boy asks her to trust him. The girl says everything will be fine. The boy explains that they'll definitely return home alive. The man asks her to wait for Mrs. Lilifa. The image does not contain any text or character speech. Only 4 characters and the chapter title are shown. The man explains that the city has several districts, each with its own characteristics and functions. He explains that the central part of the city is the business and commercial center, where offices and shops are concentrated, while residential areas are located around it. The man explains that industrial zones and parks are located on the outskirts. The guy reports that the performance was a success after all, and now the country's residents have united against Nobueda, but he explains that he still doesn't have complete information about the enemy's strength, so he can't relax for a second. The elf says that they are about to enter Nobueda's domain, to which the guy replies that yes, but he doesn't think that they will give them the prisoners so easily, and asks if those elves can be trusted. Tsukasa Misaki explains that they swore an oath in the name of the sacred tree, and these are the words of an oath passed down through generations among elves. She reports that an oath in the name of the sacred tree is perceived by them as absolute and unconditional. The man says that no one is allowed to attack without his order and offers to go, explaining that he's already said so. The girl confirms that she understands. The text above states that elves who break their oath are considered to have defiled the name of the god and become enemies of all other elves. And the woman asks the captain if he should take them to Commander-in-Chief Sarvin, and informs him that they have arrived despite not having escaped. The man replies curtly. The elf says he will bring the guide and his companions, as requested. The guy reports that these ruins were a city. The man in armor tells him not to stop and orders him to go. The man explains that there are several people in the fortress and says they have arrived. The man says that now they need to decide what to do next. The elf says they arrived faster than he expected, which is very commendable. The boy is silent, then asks if this means he represents the Noblord and clarifies whether he will negotiate with him. The guy asks about the negotiations and what they're talking about. The woman says they came at Leitstud's request. The guy says that no one forced them and everything was done of their own free will. The man says that his country doesn't need the High Elves because they can use their ancient magic, and offers peaceful cooperation that will depend on the interlocutor. The ruler says that violence should be a last resort, explains that if the issue can be resolved peacefully, then it is not scary to make small concessions, and the man with the spear says that dialogue is needed first. The man says that if it is possible to bring back Lilifa and the others without shedding blood, then that would be great. The man on the right says he's laughing, the man on the left also says he's laughing, and the man in the center is silent. The man laughs and says that the other man is too small and doesn't know his place, and the other man replies that he didn't think so. The man says they are high elves and a pure-blooded race, the founders of the elven race. The man says he would also like to hear something from the other man and asks what he has to say. The man says that he won't say anything special and explains that this person is leading the negotiations. The elf explains that a recent incident has made him realize the astonishing magical power of his interlocutor, and says that he is so powerful that he can defeat even him. The man reveals that the spells they don't know can only be used by high elves, the founders of the lineage. The man asks why the girl starts with a man and calls people a barbaric, inferior race. He says he doesn't deny his elven heritage, but his values and those of others seem to differ greatly. The man laughs and says that he should forget his elven dignity. The guy says okay. The man says it's actually good for them. The man raises his hand. The man looks up. The man watches as a large flying creature appears. The guy says he didn't expect this turn of events. The woman says the situation is more complicated than it seemed, and the other woman explains that they need to proceed with caution now. The dragon says that even though she's corrupted, she still has some elven blood in her, and notes that she knows everything. The elf cries out to Leifa and asks how this can be, how they could remove the seal and still be sane. The boy next to her calls out to Leifa. The guy says he wants to know what's wrong, Leifa, and asks what kind of dragon it is. Leifa remains silent. Tsukasa Misaki explains that an elven epic passed down through generations describes a dragon that is said to have been given to the elves by an ancient god. The man explains that long ago, when the world was on the brink of destruction, he used his power to help fight the demon king. But after the war, the ancient elves sealed him away. He says it's because he's a dragon and adds, he. The woman remains silent, and the man says that since she knows, he won't have to explain for long. The guy tells the man that to achieve something great, you need the corresponding strength, and strength always comes at a price. It is said that the power of the fairy dragon is unmatched, but as payment for this, it accepts nothing but the flesh and blood of a race possessing noble, superior magical power. The man explains that the dragon is the flesh and blood of the elves, and that is why the ancient elves sealed the fairy dragon. The man says they must overcome the humiliation inflicted upon them by the human race 100 years ago, but they desperately need the power of Noblewood. The woman listens. Tsukasa Misaki explains that when the fairy dragon was released from the seal, he was extremely hungry, but he was in no condition to fight right away. The man explains that they specifically let those who would become food for him live for the sake of this day, and says that they, as the wisest elves of Noblezid, were ready for this. The boy says, "Let those who will become food live." Then he explains that he can only accept elven flesh and blood. That is, the man says he eats elves and only them. Tsukasa Misaki says that's impossible and that he's been eating them for the past month. The man confirms and calls him half-elves. The boy shouts, asking where the queen and her husband are, and says they're his mother. The girl asks him to wait and asks what's wrong with her mother, and he calls her Lady Kifa. The man explains that the dragon fairy's stomach already contains people with human blood. The boy demands Lilitha be returned immediately and asks where the half-elves who were kidnapped yesterday are. He says he kept his promise and came here, and demands that the other one keep his promise and return the hostages, reminding him that he swore by the name of the sacred tree. The man asks if it's named after a sacred tree and says a spoiled brat told him. The woman says Lilitha is another of her daughters and remarks that the man is so obedient that he needs this girl. The man and two other men exchange glances. The guy says that an oath in the name of a sacred tree is indeed absolute and unconditional, but when the one swearing to is a half-elf, it changes everything. The man says there's definitely no need to keep the oath given to spoiled half-breeds, and the look on the spoiled girl's face was simply masterpiece. He laughs and explains that she believed until the very end that she would be saved. The man laughs, making different variations of laughter. Ha 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 ha, ha ha, ha 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 ha, and ha ha ha. Tsukasa Misaki explains that the shield protects against attacks and says it won't let the enemy get close. The woman explains that thanks to the shield, they can retreat safely. The boy says they can now move forward without fear of attack. The man explains that you can see mountains in this place, and he says that people often spend time here to enjoy the view and relax. The man with the spear asks what happened. The man in the cloak replies that he saw some kind of distortion in the depths of the forest. The man laughs and says he understands. The man and the girl laugh. The man says that's it, he finally realized that he was a complete fool and he starts talking. The woman says she can't believe this happened. The man explains that it was unexpected and that they need to act quickly. The boy explains that there's nothing in this world except them and that they can't return to their own world. The girl explains that they have to live here and that this is their new reality. The man says he thought they could talk and find common ground, and then reveals he was wrong. The speaker says that they are no longer elves or even humans. A man asks what kind of magical power this is and says it's consuming the entire city. Another man wonders if it's a closing barrier. Tsukasa Misaki shouts that from now on, they're no longer people to him, but beasts and creatures that bring misfortune to everyone around them. The boy asks what kind of army this is and reports that they are under attack by enemies. The man orders that the hunter commander be reported immediately and that their country be contacted. The man expresses disbelief and surprise, not believing that an entire army could suddenly appear, and asks if